Nobody wanted them. Not the 72% who told pollsters that fleeing Jews should not be admitted to the United States. Not the Congress that designed quotas specifically to block Eastern European Jews. Not the Coast Guard that turned a ship of 900 back toward the gas chambers. America built an exclusion system and called it law. In 1943, a rabbi reached a forgotten New Jersey town with 14 students. Today, it holds 142,000 people. On a Thursday afternoon in Lakewood, New Jersey, the air smells like yeast and sugar. Kosher bakeries along the main commercial roads stack challahs 5 deep in their windows. Young mothers push double strollers past Judaica shops where silver candelabras fill the display cases. Men in dark suits walk between study halls with the purposeful stride of people who know exactly where they need to be. Children on scooters line the pavements. Pairs of girls in matching uniforms carry book bags nearly as large as they are. This is not a college town. This is not a retirement village. This is something else entirely. How did the country that tried hardest to keep Jews out become the country where they built their most complete world? The answer begins not in Lakewood, but in the chambers of the United States Congress in 1924. The Johnson-Reed Act, also known as the Immigration Act of 1924, set immigration quotas at 2% of each nationality's population, as recorded in the 1890 census. That baseline date was chosen deliberately. It preceded the Great Wave of Eastern European Jewish immigration. Russia alone had accounted for nearly 75% of Jewish immigrants to America. Under the new law, that flow was reduced to a trickle. Senator David Reed of Pennsylvania told the Senate he was interested in keeping American stock up to the highest standard. He claimed that immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe arrived sick and starving. Both the American Federation of Labor and the Ku Klux Klan endorsed the legislation. Eugenics was offered as scientific justification. The law passed with overwhelming margins in both chambers. The exclusion did not stop at the border. In 1922, the president of Harvard proposed a 15% quota on Jewish students. He argued that too many Jews could actually provoke more anti-Semitism. At Columbia University in New York, the Jewish student population dropped from 40% around 1914 to less than 15% within a decade. Princeton held the lowest quota of all at 4%. Entire industries, including commercial banking, insurance, and automobile manufacturing, employed no Jewish executives at any level. Even residential neighborhoods were not exempt. Restrictive covenants written directly into property deeds across Long Island, Westchester County, and dozens of other regions prohibited the sale of homes to Jewish buyers. Country clubs, social organizations, and professional networks maintained invisible walls that no credential could breach. Then came the 1930s. Fascism rose in Germany. Jewish families sought passage across the Atlantic. The quotas were not modified. In April 1938, more than half of Americans told pollsters that the persecution of Jews in Europe was partly their own fault. 54% agreed with that statement. In May 1939, the German ocean liner St. Louis sailed from Hamburg carrying 937 passengers. Almost all were Jewish refugees holding Cuban landing certificates, but just before arrival, Cuba invalidated them. Cuba refused to let them disembark in Havana Harbor. The ship turned north toward Florida. Passengers standing on the deck could see the lights of Miami. The United States refused entry. Canada refused entry. The ship returned to Europe. 254 of those passengers were later killed in the Holocaust. The United States accepted only 21,000 refugees from Europe during this entire period. It did not raise or even fill its own restrictive quotas. Into this history arrived Rabbi Aharon Kotler. He had led a yeshiva in the town of Kletsk in what is now Belarus. Most of his 300 students had perished in the gas chambers. He reached the United States in April 1941 through the rescue efforts of the Vaad Hatzalah organization. He carried the weight of everything that had been lost, and a belief that borders on stubbornness that it could be rebuilt. Kotler chose Lakewood, New Jersey, a former winter resort for the Rockefellers and the Goulds. now fading into irrelevance. Grand hotels along the lakefront stood half empty. The town was affordable, quiet, and overlooked. Close enough to reach Manhattan by car, but far enough for the silence he required. In 1943, he founded Beth Medrash Govoha in a modest rented building. 13 students enrolled at the start. It was among the first major kollels in the United States, institutions where men receive a stipend while studying Torah full-time. The idea that grown men would devote their entire adult lives to religious scholarship in post-war America struck nearly everyone who heard it as absurd. The sociologist Marshall Sclair wrote in 1955 that the history of Orthodox Judaism in America was a case study in institutional decay. He predicted it would continue to lead an attenuated existence on the margins of American Jewish life. That prediction became one of the great miscalculations in American religious history. Aaron Kotler, the founder's grandson, has spoken publicly about what Lakewood was like when he was a child. He recalls visiting Brooklyn for the Sabbath and seeing 30 or 40 Orthodox children gathered in an afternoon group. He thought it must be the International Convention of Orthodox Jewish Children. He did not know there were that many in the entire world. That memory belongs to a place that no longer exists. The mechanism that turned Lakewood from a fading resort into one of the fastest-growing municipalities in America is not wealth. It is not politics. It is religious law. Every Friday at sundown, a 25-hour period begins in which observant Jews cannot drive. They cannot use electricity. They cannot carry objects outside the home unless a symbolic boundary called an eruv surrounds the neighborhood. This means everything a family needs must exist within walking distance. The synagogue, the school, the kosher grocery, the mikveh, the bakery. This single requirement produces by structural necessity exactly what urban planners spend decades trying to engineer. Dense, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods where people know their neighbors because they pass them on foot every single week. The ARUV itself is an almost invisible infrastructure. Thin wires strung between utility poles, door frames, and specially erected posts form a continuous boundary around the community. Every Friday morning, a designated inspector drives the full perimeter of the Lakewood ERUV, checking for breaks caused by wind, fallen branches, or construction equipment. If a single gap is found and cannot be repaired before sundown, word spreads through the community within hours. Mothers with young children cannot carry house keys in their pockets. Families cannot push strollers to synagogue. The entire social architecture of the Sabbath depends on that unbroken line holding through the week. Thursday in Lakewood is preparation day. The rhythms of the week build toward the Sabbath like a tide pulling inward. At the Tomchai Shabbos Warehouse, the largest kosher food pantry in New Jersey, volunteers sort and pack boxes of chicken, fish, challah, and staples. More than 1,200 families in Lakewood depend on these deliveries for their Sabbath meals. Dedicated drivers load their cars and fan out across the township. By Friday afternoon, every box will have reached its destination. One Tomchai Shabbos delivery driver describes the work simply. He says every box means another family has what it needs. He drives his route the way any delivery driver would. No ceremony, no recognition. The dignity of the process, he explains, is the point. The interest-free loan societies tell a story that numbers alone cannot capture. A young couple preparing for their first child can borrow for medical costs without paying a single cent of interest. A family whose furnace breaks in January can have cash in hand by that evening. The loans are repaid quietly over months or years. No collectors knock at doors. No credit scores are damaged. The system runs on trust and on the understanding that the borrower of today becomes the lender of tomorrow. In a community where many families live close to the margin, this network functions less like charity and more like a circulatory system. It keeps the blood moving to every limb, but the gamaks extend far beyond money. In Lakewood, there are lending societies for wedding gowns, for infant car seats, for hospital beds, for breast pumps, for folding tables and chairs when a family hosts a celebration too large for their dining room. There are clothing jamaks, where children's outfits cycle through 5 or 6 families before wearing out. A mother of 9 describes how she has not purchased a high chair in over 15 years. Each one arrives from a neighbor whose youngest has outgrown it and leaves when her own child no longer needs it. The object never rests. It simply moves to wherever the need is greatest. This is not poverty. This is an economy that refuses to let usable things sit idle while someone nearby goes without. The women of Lakewood hold together the architecture that makes full-time male study possible. Many work as teachers, therapists, bookkeepers, and small business owners. They manage households with 6, 8, sometimes 12 children, while their husbands spend 10 or more hours daily in the study hall. A seminary graduate working as a speech pathologist in one of the township's early intervention programs explains that she chose this life deliberately. She says the learning her husband does is something she considers as much her achievement as his. The partnership is not silent, it is structural. Late in the evening, the study halls of Beth Midrash Govoha are still full. The yeshiva now enrolls more than 9,600 students across its affiliated institutions. Rows of paired desks stretch the length of enormous rooms. Young men sit across from each other, rocking gently over open volumes of the Talmud. They trace lines of text with their fingers. They debate in hushed voices that occasionally rise into something closer to argument. Studies are carried out in over 200 small groups called chaburos, each pursuing its own curriculum. The sound inside these halls is unlike anything in a university library. It is the sound of thousands of simultaneous conversations. A low roar of study that continues well past midnight. In one corner of the main study hall, a grandfather and grandson sit at adjacent desks studying the same tractate. The older man learned this passage in a basement synagogue in Brooklyn in 1963. His grandson encounters it now under fluorescent lights in a building that did not exist 10 years ago. Between them sits a volume printed in Vilna in 1880, its margins filled with handwritten annotations from 3 generations. The page is the same. The world around it has changed beyond recognition. This is how continuity works in Lakewood, not through monuments or museums, but through the repetition of study across lifetimes, each generation adding its own voice to the accumulated conversation. Friday afternoon arrives, and the acceleration is visible. Bakeries push out their final trays. Kosher butchers wrap their last cuts. The streets fill with a particular urgency that has nothing to do with panic and everything to do with purpose. Then sundown comes, and then silence. The commercial streets empty. The car parks go still. Families walk to synagogue in clusters. Fathers hold the hands of small children. Older boys walk in groups of 3 or 4. For 25 hours, a township of more than 140,000 people enters a different mode of being. A shopkeeper on one of the main commercial streets explains that every customer who walks through his door is also a neighbor. There is no anonymity in Lakewood, he says. If you sell someone a bad piece of fish on Thursday, you will sit next to him in synagogue on Saturday morning. That single observation tells you more about how this economy works than any census report ever could. The largest single age group in Lakewood is children under 5, more than 22,000 of them. The school district provides busing to 74 yeshivas. The township's population grew by roughly 45% between 2010 and 2020. About 1,000 new families arrive every year. Construction cranes are visible from nearly every major intersection. Entire blocks of pine forest have given way to rows of townhouses with facades still pale with fresh siding. Where a single kosher supermarket once served the community, there are now dozens. Their aisles stock products imported from Israel, labeled in Hebrew and English. Wedding halls book events nearly every night except Friday and Saturday. A single hall on a busy Wednesday evening might host 400 guests. The economic engine is almost entirely internal. A family pays tuition to a yeshiva. The yeshiva pays its teachers. The teachers buy groceries from the kosher market. The market owner donates to the yeshiva. The circle is tight and self-reinforcing. And Lakewood is not an isolated case. In the 1970s, Grand Rebbe Joel Teitelbaum led 500 Satmar Hasidic followers to a remote wooded area in Orange County, New York. They called it Kiryas Joel. Today, it holds more than 41,000 residents. The median age is 15.7 years. More than 58% of residents are under the age of 18. A village administrator named Gedalye Segedin has explained the dynamics plainly. He says 3 religious principles drive the growth. Women do not use birth control, couples marry young, and after marriage they stay and start families. These are not communities in decline. These are communities in acceleration. But growth at this speed does not happen in a vacuum. In Toms River, New Jersey, yard signs appeared on front lawns. They read, "Do not sell" and "Toms River strong." The message was not subtle. Residents of neighboring towns point to overdevelopment, where multiple family dwellings replace single-family houses and natural woodland. They raise concerns about a public school system under fiscal strain. The economics are genuinely complicated. Tax-exempt properties owned by private schools, charities, and religious institutions make up a significant portion of Lakewood's land value. In neighboring Toms River, that figure is 1.5%. The public school system serves a shrinking share of the township's children, while mandated busing for tens of thousands of private yeshiva students places a massive fiscal strain on the district's budget. Local property taxpayers feel they are funding a system they do not benefit from. The community responds that its members pay property taxes, support local businesses, and generate the economic activity that rescued Lakewood from decades of decline. Neither side is entirely wrong. In Postville, Iowa, the friction took a different and more painful form. A Lubavitcher businessman named Sholom Rubashkin bought the old meatpacking plant and transformed it into the largest glatt kosher processing facility in the country. A farming town whose population had been declining since the 1970s suddenly had life in its streets again. Then, on May 12, 2008, Immigration and Customs Enforcement deployed 900 agents and arrested 398 workers at the plant. The company went into bankruptcy. The plant shuttered 5 months later. A Postville counselor named Bob Schroeder offered his own accounting years later. He said the newcomers had saved the town from what he called a slow death. That the community had been reinvigorated, that there was life again, that he had made many friends from all over the world and they were very good people. His words carried no romance and no agenda. Just an honest reckoning with what he saw. Some places are finding a way through. Interfaith dialogues have been initiated in Toms River between long-standing residents and Orthodox leaders. Others are still searching. The story has no ending because it is not finished. Saturday morning in Lakewood, the streets carry that particular silence that comes not from absence but from intention. Families walk in small groups toward their synagogues. A father holds the hand of a boy who cannot be more than 4. An older man in a black coat walks slowly, unhurried, his prayer book tucked under his arm. The bakeries are shuttered. The car parks are full, but no engine turns over. 82 years ago, a man who had lost nearly everything arrived in a town that was losing the same. He had 14 students and an idea the rest of the world considered impossible. 14,000 alumni of his institution have since established over 1,000 schools and synagogues across the globe. The oldest residents remember when this was a town of boarding houses and empty hotels. The youngest will never know it as anything other than home.